What's up? What's happening? Welcome back here to Lacrosse Now. I'm Travis Eldridge, back with you again this week. We did my NCAA men's top 10 coming out of fall ball last week. We're going to get to my NCAA women's top 10 coming out of fall ball this week. So stay tuned for that. I'll give you my top 10 teams in D1 women's lacrosse entering this 2023 season. Also, a couple of terrific guests. We'll be talking with head coach at Cornell, Connor Busick, coming off taking that Big Red program to the Final Four in his first year as the team's head coach. We'll talk to him about this offseason, things kind of returning to normalcy for all the programs in the Ivy League in terms of their summer schedule, recruiting, fall ball, all that. So we'll hit on that and what the expectations are there at Cornell after such a spectacular year last year and a ton coming back. So we'll talk with head coach Connor Busick. And our watch party replay interview this week, a really, really good one. We'll talk with former UMass player Dan Muller. You may remember that name from the goal heard round the world back in 2017 in the CAA semifinals. He scored from midfield against Hofstra to knock off the Pride, put UMass in that championship game that year. One of the more improbable finishes we've seen in college lacrosse history. He will relive that whole moment, talk about what was going through his head, what he's thought of since that great goal, all that with Dan Muller in our watch party interview this week. But as I mentioned, I'm going to get to my NCAA women's lacrosse top 10 coming out of fall ball. And just like we did last week, we're going to count up from 10 all the way to 1. So let's kick this thing off. My number 10 team entering here into 2023, Notre Dame, had a disappointing season last year. It was up and down. They got off to a slow start with a couple of early losses, ended up finishing 9-10, got beat in the NCAA tournament by Michigan. But I really like what this Irish team has coming back. They've got Casey Choma and Madison Ahern both coming back. Those were two of their top scorers a year ago. They actually returned their top 3 scorers from last season, the Irish. Both Choma and Ahern are coming off winning a silver medal with Team USA in the World Games in the Sixes event. And you look through their schedule last year, and this is one of the reasons I feel positive about them. They had a lot of 1 and 2 goal losses that made up what ended up being a below 500 record. But you turn a couple of those around and you look at this team maybe like we looked at Duke last year in terms of winning a couple of those games, and all of a sudden they end up being a top 10, top 15 team by the end of the year. So Notre Dame was battle-tested all season long. They just didn't have a couple of games go their way. I like with their top 3 scorers back, they will have to figure out some stuff at the other end of the field, but I think they're going to find their way in the ACC to be a contender once again. So I have them in there at number 10. Let's go out west for my number 9 team going into 2023, and that would be Stanford. This is a Cardinal team that was really had promise toward the end of the year, and then a head-scratching loss in the NCAA tournament to Jacksonville. Kind of got run off the field in that game, which was a little surprising. But I think you point to maybe some of the inexperience on this roster. It was a really young team last year, and a lot of those young players got experience. And I think that is what makes this team so promising here entering this year. Ashley Humphrey was spectacular last year at the attack spot. She had 3 games in which she had double-digit points. We're talking 10, 11, 12 points in a game. She put up unbelievable numbers as one of the top players on the Stanford team early in her career. She is back. She's going to be leading the way now with Ali Bioko now moving on. So it's this Humphreys team, and she's just joined by a lot of talented pieces. You look at the Inside Lacrosse Power 100 rankings, and we talked about those a couple of weeks ago with Alyssa Murray-Cometti from Inside Lacrosse. And all 7 players, all 7 members of this freshman class for Stanford were in those Power 100 rankings, including a handful in the top 20 in the country in terms of freshmen. So we talked about the recruiting class last year being one of the better ones, and now they add to that with another spectacular freshman class. I think all of that talent is going to continue to come together. I don't know if this is maybe a Final Four run year, but certainly I think they're one of the class. They're pretty much the class of the Pac-12 entering this season. And I really like what Danielle Spencer is doing. They've got a ton of talent, and I think she will continue to get it to come together at the right time of the year. So it was a head-scratching end to last year, but I really like Stanford entering 2023. So let's go to number 8. That's where I have James Madison. New conference, but same JMU. Of course, they have left the CAA, a place where they were a perennial contender for the championship. I now think they're going to be a perennial contender in the American Athletic Conference. They're now in the AAC, which is going to make for a very interesting dynamic because the AAC now for years has been dominated by Florida. The Gators just don't lose in this conference. Temple has given them a run a little every once in a while. Vanderbilt had a nice start to last year, but this has been the Gators conference chomping away. Well, now you got James Madison, another team that has dominated a conference now for a number of years. So they come in, and this is going to be a great battle between the two. We're going to get to the Gators here in a second. But sticking with James Madison, they lose Molly Doherty, which was one of the last remaining pieces of that national championship team from back in 2017. She was so good in goal for this squad, such a presence back there in terms of calming and a leader from really the time she stepped on the field, a vocal leader as well. So they've got to figure that out. But they've got talent from there on up, including Isabella Peterson back. I mean, she had a terrific, especially second half of last season, became a point-scoring machine for them. So she's really talented and back. And I think that all coming together is going to make this James Madison team a contender in a new conference. And I do like the fact that they've got a game now against Florida in conference play. You know, James Madison is going to test itself out of conference as well. They'll have a loaded non-conference schedule. So that combination of things, they'll be back in the tournament and back as a contender for that quarterfinal round once again. And once you get there, you never know. You're a win or two away from really making it a magical season. So I get James Madison at 8. And speaking of the Gators, I have them at number 7. And this is another team, kind of like Stanford, that was very young last year. The Gators' whole storyline around this team last year was they lost everything. They had seniors and fifth-year players galore that were key members of that Gators team a couple of seasons ago in 2021. Well, last year in 2022, kind of a new look, especially on offense, and they kind of figured it out. I mean, you look at what Emma Pinto did in her freshman year, one of the top players in the country as a freshman, proved it when she stepped on the field. She was the leader of a really good young group for them. So I like having her back. And then unlike James Madison, who lost their star goalie Molly Doherty, Sarah Resnick is back for this Gators team. I mean, we saw her at times almost single-handedly help win the Gators games. I mean, that game she had against Syracuse in the regular season where the Gators knocked off the Orange down in Gainesville, spectacular. She was one of the major reasons why the Gators won that game. And when you have a talent like that at that end of the field that can steal you some games, that is how you make deep runs into May and going toward Memorial Day. So I think that's key. And despite having a pretty young team a year ago, they still made it to the quarterfinals, ended up getting beat up by Maryland up in College Park. But I think that's a great experience for a young team to get that far, despite the fact they had a bunch of new pieces. The other piece offensively, along with Lopinto that's back, a more veteran piece in Danielle Pavanelli. So they return a bunch. I like the Gators. I give them a slight edge in the AAC over James Madison as the team to watch, but I think both teams are going to be good. And I think the fact that they're now in the same conference only going to make both teams better. So I think that is something to watch throughout the year. Not saying James Madison and Towson had some great battles through the years in the CAA. Florida hasn't really had that team to go head-to-head with them to contend in the AAC. So I think this is going to make the Gators better now having James Madison in their conference. So there's 7, 8, 9, and 10, which brings me to number 6, a team that I, of course, have a soft spot for in Syracuse, my alma mater, the Orange, now in year 2 under Kayla Trainer, a team that had so much promise entering last year. And once again, injury bug really got the Orange. It's one of the things that Syracuse has been talking about here in the fall is not only how do we get better, but how do we make sure that we can try to keep the team as healthy as possible? Because it's been a couple of years in a row now that the Orange have been bitten by the injury bug. Emma Ward was one of the players that went down with the ACL injury last year, but she's coming back. That's key. And believe it or not, Syracuse is the only team that returns a Tewaaraton finalist from that last year. That's Megan Tyrell. She is back. She's the only of the 5 that is back here this year returning. And so having her, along with Megan Carney, back for a 5th year, despite the fact that they had a couple of goalies last year, it felt like at times they didn't have their person back there in net. They're hoping that maybe Kimber Howard takes that next step, can be that goalie who solidifies things in the defensive end for Syracuse. But I think with Tyrell back, Ward hopefully back healthy, Carney, and the talent is there for Syracuse. They've got players up and down the roster returning that got experience last year, a team that was a top 5 team throughout the season. I think they're back in the mix, making a run, hopefully, for championship weekend again. So I've got Syracuse at number 6. I still think there's some question marks in terms of can they keep this roster healthy and get it done throughout the entire year, but the talent is there for them to be a top 4 team. I just have some more question marks than I have about the top 5, so that's why I have them at 6. So let's get to the top 5. I'm going to give Northwestern the slight edge over Syracuse for the 5 spot. Of course, the dominant win in the quarterfinals last year against the Orange gives them an edge, and the fact that they do get a Tewaaraton finalist back, not a Tewaaraton finalist from last year, but a Tewaaraton finalist from 2 years ago in Izzy Skane. That is a gigantic plus for this Wildcats team. I mean, the fact that Northwestern made championship weekend last year without Izzy Skane was pretty incredible, and it shows you the depth of talent that was around Izzy, because she was arguably one of the best players in the country 2 years ago. She goes down with the injury and misses the entire season here in 2022. Her being back and healthy is going to be scary for the rest of the Big Ten. I really like Northwestern. She'll be joined by Erin Coy-Kendall and Leah Holmes up at attack to add some depth there. They do have to replace Lauren Gilbert, who really stepped into the role that was left by Izzy Skane being injured up front. But I think Skane coming back healthy is what they need offensively. So I got Northwestern at 5 coming off another championship weekend appearance. And remember, I mean, how close were they to beating North Carolina there in the semifinals? They almost felt like they had that game. And, of course, UNC made the incredible comeback. But Northwestern, a team to watch. So let's get to my top 4. You know, we haven't talked about Stony Brook yet. I've got them maybe higher than most. I've got them at number 4 because I really like all the pieces that this squad under Joe Spallina has coming back. I mean, you start with Kaylin Hart at attack, a highlight machine since her freshman year. Ellie Macera had another spectacular year last year. She's back in the midfield. Haley Dillon, who was the America East Defender of the Year last year, she's back there on the defensive side. Shannon Hecht, a goalie transfer who spent some time at Temple as a starter. She steps in likely to that goalie role as Charlie Campbell has left, who spent most of the time in goal there winning that battle last year. They gave UNC another massive test in the quarterfinal round, and it just feels like one of these years Stony Brook is going to break through. It's going to take them probably beating one of these top teams in order to do it. It just feels like one of these years they're going to break through. They, like James Madison, are in a new conference. They joined the CAA, and much like how James Madison, I think, will and Florida will benefit from having a team like James Madison in there, I think Stony Brook is going to benefit from some of the teams they're going to play in the CAA. We've seen Drexel have put together some really good teams, Hofstra as well. Towson you can never count out. So I think Stony Brook's going to walk in and be the class of the CAA and really take over that mantle that JMU is leaving by leaving the conference. But I think they will be battle-tested. And no offense to the America East, but I think they will be slightly more battle-tested in the CAA than they have been over the last couple of years in conference play, which should theoretically help their RPI numbers and their strength of schedule numbers, which helps hopefully when on Selection Sunday your seed is a little bit better than it's been for Stony Brook, and that hopefully for Joe Spallina and company, helps them have a better opportunity to get to championship weekend for the first time. So keep an eye on Stony Brook. All those things considered, they got a ton of talent back. So I like the Seawolves at number 4. Which brings us to the top 3. Got a couple of ACC teams and a Big Ten team. We'll start with Boston College at number 3. And I think this Eagles team may have the best player in the country. Belle Smith is a bona fide Tewaaraton contender. Charlotte North may be gone. She's a big name. She did amazing things for this Eagles program. But there were times Belle Smith looked like she was the best player on the field in the last couple of seasons for Boston College. And I think she is going to continue to take that step forward. You know, you look at this Boston College program and the questions after the big three when Apuzzo, Dempsey Arsenal, Kenzie Kent left were, all right, well, what's going to happen now? They've made it to the championship game. They haven't won a title. How are they going to replace these players? Well, in comes Charlotte North and many other talented players, and they do take this program to the next level. They win a national title. All right, so Charlotte North is gone. What happens now? Well, I think Belle Smith takes another jump. Jen Medjid is back at the attack spot. Rachel Hall is still in goal for Boston College. They've had some terrific recruiting classes over the last couple of years. Top 5 classes because, I mean, who wouldn't want to go to Boston College if you have the opportunity to play for Acacia Walker-Weinstein and this coaching staff? So they are loaded again, and I think Belle Smith takes a step forward. I think she is a Tewaaraton finalist this year, and this Boston College team is once again right there in the mix, despite Charlotte North now having moved on. So I got BC at number 3, which gets me to the top 2, and it's 2 teams that we know well in the women's game as being top teams and top programs in the sport. We're going to put Maryland at number 2. It was a bounce-back year for this Terps program last year, and I mean, it seems crazy to think after, you know, they make the run they did last year, but we had question marks about this Maryland program entering last year. They spent time outside of the top 5 when maybe they probably should have been a top 5 team earlier on in last year, but we just weren't sure what to make of them yet because they had a down-ish year. They weren't quite as good as they had been. Well, they are all the way back. Let's start in goal because Emily Sterling may be a Tewaaraton candidate as a goalie, and that's saying something. She was one of the best goalies in the country last year, and defensively in front of her, this team is loaded. This may be the hardest team to score on in the country entering 2023 because Sterling, of course, will backstop everything. Abby Bosco, the Penn transfer who we saw play last year for Maryland, she's back for another year, so she's stellar on the back end. And they add a star defender from Princeton and a grad transfer in Marge Donovan on that end of the field. So that side, we're good. In the midfield, Hannah Lubecker is back. She had a terrific season a year ago. And then you got Libby May, Eloise Clevenger back offensively. Oh, and by the way, Maryland also adds the top recruit in the country in Corey Edmondson, number 1 in the Inside Lacrosse Power 100 rankings. So I have a feeling that she will find her way on the field at some point here in 2023. So all that tells you why Maryland goes into this season as my number 2 team. I think they are right there, and they are all the way back. They proved that a year ago, so keep an eye on the Terps. Maybe we see them returning to the national title game here in 2023. But my number 1 spot goes to the team that was the undefeated national champion a year ago, North Carolina. Jenny Levy had it all going last year. They had this spectacular season. I'm still surprised Jamie Ortega didn't win the Tewaaraton Award, helping his team win a national title. But they lose a lot. Carolina team loses Ortega, Ali Mastriani, Emma Trenchard. I mean, all these players not only helped them win a national title, also were players for Team USA in the World Championships for the World Championships on the women's side this summer. So they lose a lot, but they also return a lot. I mean, this team it tells you just how loaded they were a year ago because I think it's Caitlin Wurzberger's time now. We talked to Alyssa Murray Cometti about Wurzberger a couple weeks ago on the podcast, Cometti from Inside Lacrosse, and how she was one of the most highly decorated recruits and almost one of the most talked about recruits maybe ever in the women's game, in women's lacrosse, coming out of high school. She steps on campus, and because of all the talent that's been in front of her, she's been able to just kind of play her way onto the field, and she's done some great things and hasn't gotten maybe the same accolades because she hasn't been that number 1 player yet. Well, she can now be that number 1 player with Ortega gone. I think it's Wurzberger's offense. The offense will run through her. I love the addition of Lauren Fergura the transfer from St. Joe's. She had a spectacular season for the Hawks last year, helped them make a run in the Atlantic 10 tournament. But she transfers down to Chapel Hill. She put up huge numbers for the Hawks, and she was the number one option for St. Joe's. So you now put her on offense where she doesn't have to be the number one option. I think that's really dangerous. She's great. You got Olivia Dirks back in the midfield, the transfer from Penn State, now in her second season with the Tar Heels. And then, and by the way, Elizabeth Hillman also there as well. And then defensively, team's loaded again. Emily Knowles, a lockdown defender. She's terrific, as is Brooklyn Walker-Welch. Both spent time with their respective national teams for the World Championships this summer. I love that experience for them. And so it shows you just up and down the field. They have players back that are super talented. Teams loaded once again. So I don't know if it's an undefeated national championship year again for North Carolina, but coming off that special 2022 season, I've got the Tar Heels back at the top spot entering 2023. Unlike on the men's side, where it felt like Maryland coming off that unbelievable year has tons to replace, and I don't know if I have all the answers yet. I think I got a lot of answers for North Carolina. Jenny Levy has done an incredible job recruiting and continuing to funnel great talent in there, much like we've seen Maryland do here over the last decade plus. So I got Carolina 1, Maryland 2 entering 2023. Speaking of a team with a lot of expectations entering 2023, the Cornell men, coming off a championship weekend run a year ago, had a chance to catch up with their head coach, Connor Busick, entering his second season at the helm.
This segment of Lacrosse Now is brought to you by Watch Dingo.
So you've got the head coach from Cornell, Connor Busick, joining us now. Connor, what's it been like to have kind of a normal fall here for the first time in your head coaching career?
Yeah, it's been great. For us, it's been a good opportunity to kind of get back to the basics. And again, without some of the distractions maybe that we've dealt with the last few years. And so for us, it's obviously a big fall, an opportunity to build off of some great experience gained last year, but recognizing that's a new year. And so trying to find this team's, the 2023 version of Cornell Lacrosse's identity and figure out what it's going to look like for us as we get lead up to the spring.
So what is it like coming on? Because you mentioned championship weekend last year. You make a run to the championship game. You're playing on Memorial Day. That's everybody's goal. Now you got to restart as you come back in the fall. How do you build off of what that momentum is while also realizing like it's a fresh beginning and we got to start this thing from scratch?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, coming back this fall, guys last year got great experience. We had a very young roster coming off of 2 years, without playing. And so there was a lot of growing pains, and there was a lot of guys that had to play their first minutes and play in big games for the first time and get accustomed to a full season and the wear and tear that it is on the body and mentally. And so I think for that, we're fortunate we played as long as we did and had that many opportunities to compete against some great teams. Now, as we turn the page, we can talk about shoulda, woulda, coulda. But, the important part for us to recognize that last year's journey and this year's journey are different. Those teams are very different. And, we lost some great leaders and some great players to graduation. And now, it's the next version. And how do we improve and how do we make sure that we're not trying to tie the two together, but taking the lessons and the maturity and, a lot of the experience that we took from last season and put it forward to this new journey. And so that's been the big thing for us. Just turn the page, figure out what this team looks like, figure out our strengths and weaknesses, and be the best version ourselves that we can be.
CJ Kurse last year was one of those young guys, hadn't had a chance to play college lacrosse yet, and he bursts onto the scene, has an incredible first year, then goes in and has the experience in Ireland with the US U21 team. I wonder, what do you look at with him now as he comes back in the fall in terms of maturity, and now knowing that like on every scouting report, he's going to be one of the guys that they circle and try to figure out how to stop, maybe different than at least the beginning part of last year?
Yeah, he's a really special, player in person. He's a guy that got so much great experience for us last year, and then the opportunity to go play in the World Games this past summer and obviously have the success that he did. He's come back polished and ready to go, and he's hit the ground running and pushed the pace for our team from a competitive level, how he's ready to embrace that role and know that he'll be on the top of every scouting report. But he's a guy that day in and day out sets the standard for us and how hard we want to compete and the way we want to go about our business. He loves lacrosse. He loves the competition of it all, and he loves getting better at his craft. And so he's a guy that certainly sets the standard for us. And again, a relatively young guy just in terms of his on-field experience, but a guy that's been here for 3 years. And so really helping, solidify our leadership along with all of our seniors.
It has to be a great luxury to have him obviously returning offensively and then having a guy like Gavin Adler returning on the defensive end. What kind of ease for a head coach is it knowing you've got a lockdown number one defender who's going to be back on that end?
Yeah, again, the more experience you can return, and specifically on the defensive end, where so much of it is predicated on being in sync and making sure, guys are flowing together and operating to, 7 as 1. It's huge to have a guy like that back. And again, he does the same thing on the defensive end where kind of just sets the standard for what it means to do your job, to prepare, to be ready for whether it's practice, workout, games, whatever. So between him and Chase Erlin, having that veteran presence on that side of the ball certainly goes a long way, especially this fall, and bringing some younger guys along, and getting them up to speed for what we're hoping and what we're expecting as we head into the spring.
In the fall here, you guys had that unique opportunity to have a national championship rematch with Maryland in the fall, a neutral site down in Philadelphia. The game sold out. That's a unique fall environment that not a lot of teams get to be part of. What was that like for you guys?
Yeah, the environment there was incredible. Springfield did a really good job taking care of us and hosted us in their brand new stadium that was beautiful. And so got a great fall day, and the atmosphere was reminiscent of a May game more than, an October game. And so good opportunity for us. Maryland's so consistent and so well coached and such a talented roster that it's a good litmus test. We don't get a ton of fall ball in the Ivy League. We're a little restricted in terms of our hours. And so that certainly always, puts in a little extra focus on how we're going to play more than what we're going to do and what the system looks like. But, it was a good opportunity for us. Like you said, national championship rematch, a team that, is a perennial favorite on Memorial Day. And so for us, it was a great learning opportunity. And the cool part is you play that one game in the fall, you're not turning around and looking for the next opponent the following week. You can spend some time kind of going through that tape and pulling out different pieces and situations and spend a little more time learning from it than turning the page, figuring out how you're going to write whatever you didn't do that well and start preparing for another team. So it's been a really good month for us, following that scrimmage to get better from that tape and figure out what we need to work on as a team.
And I think, too, you don't have to wait till, an Ivy League game to have players feel, especially some of the newer players, feel the pressure of a game. Because in that environment, it may not really count for anything, but there's some pressure to it. So you can kind of figure out what some new guys have, right?
No doubt. There's a level there of competitiveness that, maybe you don't see until you get into league play. And that's that standard for that team and what they do and how they approach things. So, again, at the top end, it was great for our guys to play against some of the best and to get, pushed. And then as we started to roll some depth for some guys to see what that looks like and play against maybe some older, more experienced players and understand what that level of competition is at the very high end, where maybe you won't always get that in your fall competition or for guys that maybe aren't in that first string. So again, across the board, going 5 quarters with a team like that, there's just a lot of good that comes from it, and certainly a lot of growing that comes from going through that tape.
I look at your offense, and I think Michael Long was at times maybe underrated last year because of all the attention CJ got. But I remember him his freshman year back in 2020. He's handling the ball sometimes at X as the quarterback attackman with Teat there. So it has to be a great luxury to have a ball handler like that, to kind of have a two-headed monster. What options does that give you with both CJ and Michael there to attack, where kind of either guy can take their defender, quote unquote, off the dribble and create for you?
Yeah, it's an incredible luxury. I thought last year we had one of the best attack units in the country. And again, like you said, between CJ and Johnny Piatelli, sometimes Mike would get overlooked. And I think he's such a talented player and such a humble kid. He just shows up to work every day, and he's a guy that we lean on. He's a senior captain for us this year, and certainly the ability that he has every time he steps on the floor, but also the chemistry with CJ that those two have, being high school teammates, being college teammates, being guys that still have plenty of runway in their college careers together, is pretty exciting for us. He's a guy that we can lean on and trust that he's doing everything that he can possibly do to perfect his craft and to help our team. And obviously to have two guys like that, that, like you said, just dynamic players, can beat you off the hop, can manage offense, can manage flow, and can do so much for you. And just, the experience, the ability to manage games, and be coaches on the field. It gives us a lot of confidence that whatever the situation is, those two guys are going to help us get to where we need to be, and make sure that we're the offense that we're hoping to be as the season progresses.
Yeah, there are a lot of teams that like to have one of those guys. You got two. That life is good there when you got that on offense. Now that you've had a chance to digest what happened at the end of last year and having the team play on Memorial Day, what did you learn throughout the whole experience? I mean, it's your first year taking a team as a head coach through this, and you get all the way to the pinnacle. Like, what did you learn from that whole deal that you take away from it?
Yeah, for me, I think in our staff, we took away that it's a long season. There's a lot of ups and downs, and there's a lot of, pieces that come together and have to come together correctly. I thought our team managed injuries exceptionally well and had that next man up mentality, and it really proved successful down the stretch of the year. But for us, we started 6-0, and then maybe 7-0, and then dropped one, and then dropped a couple near the end, and had to regroup a little bit, and then hit a stride at the right time. And so it's about peaking. It's about getting better and better, and making sure that in May you're playing your best lacrosse. And that team last year really did that and embodied that. And so for us, it's about the long haul, and maybe not the week to week, but making sure that you're stacking weeks and the trajectory is right. You're managing your team and your personnel correctly. And so for us, we've got some great guys in the locker room that help lead that ship and make sure that's going the right direction. And so for us, it's letting the guys take control of it, letting them make sure that they're pushing this thing in the right direction. And for us, just to help guide it and make sure that we're making smart decisions that's keeping the big picture in mind.
Yeah, and I have to think that, like, when you look around the Ivy League and you see the talent around the rest of the league, it's like, okay, we can't rest on what we did last year because everybody else wants it to be exactly where we were, and they're all really, really good.
Yeah, the bar's getting raised. Week in and week out, you're going to get tested throughout that Ivy League schedule. And, everybody else is getting more talented and continuing to improve. And, obviously having 6 teams last year in the NCAA tournament kind of shows you that competitive level within the league. And so if you're not getting better, somebody else is. And we're very aware of that.
For you personally, how much do you miss playing?
I miss it, but certainly I get my competitive fill in different ways. I'm happy to be on the sidelines and let these guys go do it, and certainly being around these guys, continuing to coach the players that we do. I miss it. I'd love to strap it on and get out there and be competing, but certainly the things that I'm able to do with these guys more than fills that void and keeps me young, I guess.
Yeah, we talked to some guys at the end of last year. I know you'd strap it up every once in a while and give them a taste of the Connor Busick shot on the run, right?
Yep. I haven't in a while, but certainly don't miss any opportunities. If they need a guy, I'll be the first one to throw a bucket on.
Yeah, hey, it's a unique situation. You got to use the legs you still got while you still can. Like, not every head coach for their entire career can strap it up with the college kids. So while you can still hang, you got to do it.
You're exactly right.
Connor, we appreciate the time, man. It was so much fun to watch the run you guys went on last year. Can't wait to see you guys this spring. We'll catch up here sometime soon.
That sounds good. Appreciate you having me.
Always great to catch up with Cornell head coach Connor Busick, and he can still sling it. And so we talked to some players on the Big Red last year during that Final Four run. Coach Busick gets out there and makes sure that the players know he can still shoot at, 100 miles an hour or so? Connor's still got a flamethrower from the two-point line in the pro game, despite the fact he's no longer playing professionally. So thanks to Connor. Good to catch up with him. Well, we've been replaying some of our watch party interviews here on Lacrosse Now over the last several weeks. We're going to continue that with a really good one. A couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to catch up with former UMass Minuteman Dan Muller. You may remember one of the final goals he scored in his college career. Midfield against Hofstra in the CAA semifinals. The Pride had a great year in 2017, but UMass ended it because with time winding down, Dan Muller grabbed the ball with about 2 seconds to go, flung it from the 50-yard line, and it got past Hofstra goalie Jack Kincannon. One of the most incredible finishes we've seen in not only CAA lacrosse history, but NCAA lacrosse history. The goal counted, game winner. UMass went on to the CAA championship game that year. And so that game was one of the games we highlighted as part of our UMass Watch Party Week. And we talked with Dan Muller about that game and that play specifically and what it means to him now 5 years down the road. So Dan Muller, the hero of that semifinal, joins us now. Dan, we just saw the play here, everybody watching on this watch party. So walk people through, now a couple of years removed from the half-field goal against Hofstra. What's going through your mind as that's all unfolding?
Honestly, I didn't realize until after the game I actually made the wrong play on that. So I actually wasn't even thinking at all. Saw the ball. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna pick it up, throw it at the net, see what happens here. But we were actually rewatching the clip after, and the whole sideline is screaming at me to hold on to the ball, because if I were to hold on to it, we actually would have started overtime with the ball. But like, there is nothing going through my head at that moment. It's just pick it up, try to make a play, see what happens. And I still look back at it, and I just find it funny. I see clips online every once in a while, like every last couple of years, and it feels like it was yesterday. But I'm not getting any younger, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We had your coach, Greg Canella, on earlier, and we were talking about it. And he's like, I think the entire sideline was saying, hold it, hold it. But you're on the opposite side, so you're far away. Chaos. It's raining. It's easy for you to get lost. The one thing I noticed in rewatching the clip here to get ready for rewatching this game was you kind of pushed off Buddy Carr. Like you're like, no, I got this one. Do you remember what you said to him?
I don't remember what I said to him, but I just think I was like, you know what? I was like, if this is my last game, I was like, I'm gonna go for it. I was like, I'm gonna go all out, because that game started. We went on a nice run to start that game. We were up big, and the momentum was with them 100%. So I was like, you know what? I was like, if we're gonna go out, I was like, I'm gonna go out a-blazing.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. You mentioned the momentum of the game, and like Josh Byrne, who, I mean, we now know is a dude is one of the best in the sport, and we're seeing that now at the professional level. But he's going off at the other end, like just taking over the game. What are you guys thinking on offense as you're watching the display of him, and then Ryan Tierney as well as a freshman had, I think, 4 goals. What's going through your mind as you're watching your lead disappear in the fourth quarter?
I think what we kept on talking about is we just wanted to get more possession, and that's like what we were trying to do. And then some unforced turnovers, things like that. You have a couple other shots. You have some nice saves by DJ. So really, like in the beginning of the game and towards the end of the game, there really keeping us, with some momentum, so they're not just running away with it. But I think you even have Dylan Gruder's goal when we did end up losing the lead, he comes back and ties it. You have like plays like that are just really like helped us keep us in the game, kind of keep us positive, like on an offensive end. Like, hey, we can make plays, we can make transition plays, we can hold the ball a little bit, get a little bit more possession, give our defense a little bit of a break. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. Make the plays when they're available, but don't be afraid to kind of slow things down and give our defense a break.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about holding on to the ball for overtime, because that's probably the logical way of looking at it when you're standing at half field with a second to go and you're a man down. But like the momentum of that game had completely shifted. Like, you think back, do you guys think you have a chance to win that in overtime with how the game had gone?
I think with our team, we always have a chance, but you never know in those situations how you're going to react. And then, for me, if I go to the sideline and I miss that, it's like, what does that do to the team when I get to the sideline? Everyone's like, were you hearing me say, hold it? It's just, that's an alternate world that I don't want to live in. But I think the UMass way, we would have been able to come back on top. And from being from Long Island, I would have loved to see ourselves beating Hofstra in every situation.
Rewatching you afterward, like minutes afterward, because first it's the elation and you go running down the field in the dog pile, but then like I feel like this disbelief sets in, like I can't believe I just did that, because that's the look that's on your face as you're like looking around. Like, what do you remember thinking?
Honestly, like I just remember thinking, like, what just happened? Like it's like you're thinking, am I one of those like moments now that like I remember, like, or people remember for like the rest of their lives that are on that team? I think for me, I just look back on it as one of those crazy things that should not have happened that happened. And in the moment, I think my brain just went blank. Like you're not really in belief of what happened. Like, is the game over? Like what's going on, type of a thing. 'Cause that was also the first year where that rule was like allowed. You had to, that was the first like example almost of the new rule that, if you let go of it, it goes in the net. So I think no one really knew, because I remember I was watching things after the fact, whereas some highlights and whatnot, and it's like people on the Hofstra sideline was like, that's not allowed, like it's not allowed to be a goal and all this stuff. And it gives me like a laugh every once in a while. And but definitely mind went blank in that moment. And it's just, I can't even, like, I feel like it's just almost unbelievable still today.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it's now one of those viral highlights in the sport of lacrosse that like will live on forever. What was like the coolest reaction, whether it was on social media or somebody texting you afterward, that you remember?
For me, I think actually the funniest thing was I went back to the locker room to grab my phone and my phone had died. Like, I guess like and then by the time I was able to charge it, it's just like you get millions of text messages, like people that you haven't spoken to in years just texting you, and you're like, I don't even have this person's number anymore. I was like, I don't even know who this is. But I think that for me is the greatest moment. But even then, I think it was going back to the locker room and just being able to celebrate with all the guys. And the season didn't end the way that we wanted it to on the next game, but at least we have, like, I feel like some great memories just as a group, just being able to kind of celebrate and be a part of something really cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you guys obviously didn't get it done in the CAA championship game that year, but like that moment as a redshirt senior, like it's almost like you can kind of ride off into the sunset, right? Like, is that like that a good way to remember your lacrosse career?
Yeah. I think for me, unfortunately, just when we haven't won anything, I think for me that was such a great memory. But I have so many good memories, like when we beat UNC on Garber. I scored my first ever goal in my first game. In the middle of winter in UMass. There's just so many great memories. But I think for me, just to end my career in that way was a thing I can always look back on and just be like, that was pretty cool. Like, I think at the moment I didn't appreciate it as much. And I think now I look back on it and I'm like, yeah, that was actually really cool.
Yeah, that was pretty epic. The shot heard around the lacrosse world in that CAA semifinal. Dan, we appreciate you reliving it with us, man. That was one of the great memories I've had here at the network so far. One of the great finishes I think we've seen in the sport's history. So thanks for reliving with us. Yeah, no problem. Really looking forward to the season with the guys. And we're going to send people to a game from the 2018 season against Drexel. So we thanks Dan and enjoy this next game as part of our watch party. You, of course, can catch our watch party every week starting at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. It also then starts replaying at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesdays on laxsn.com. So make sure you check it out. Coming up this week, we've got our CAA Women's Watch Party. Some terrific games there, including some overtime games, including James Madison and Towson, an overtime game winner in a CAA semifinal for the Dukes. Had a chance to catch up with some players for James Madison, Elon, Drexel, Carson Harris, Dragon Star. So make sure you check out this week's watch party here on Wednesday. As for now, that's all the time we have here for Lacrosse Now. We'll be right back here next week.